We've all identified a lot of positive benefits of how AI can be utilized in healthcare, but if we're overrepresenting the role that it can play or overrepresenting the opportunity and the benefits that it can have, I think that is a real detriment to consumers.
Hello, welcome to FDA Watch. I'm Wayne Pines. I've been involved with FDA for several decades. I was formerly an associate commissioner of the agency. I've authored or edited 16 books about the agency.
Thanks, Wayne. And I'm Shelly Garg. I'm the managing partner and founder of Garg Law, a full-service FDA-focused law firm. I have been on the private side advising companies on regulatory compliance and enforcement for the last 15 years.
Shelly and I are very excited about this episode. It concludes our first ever FDA Watch multi-episode series. We're producing this series on AI, medical products, and FDA in collaboration with the Arnold Porter law firm. In part one of the three-part series, you heard from four guests who provided a superb overview of AI in the life sciences space. They were Dan Krakoff, Abiba Haptamariam from Arnold Porter, Ethan Dabbs from the Bolton Consulting Group, and Lauren Silvis from Tempus. In part two, we focused on AI in discovery, design, and development. Three guests, Howard Sklamberg and Eva Temkin from Arnold Porter, and Marko Toplovich from Clario. In today's final episode in the series, which will cover AI commercialization, you're going to hear from three more experts, and there's a lot to cover in this episode, so let's meet them right now. First up is Phil Desjardins. Phil is a partner at Arnold Porter. He served 2 decades at CDRH, the Device Center at FDA. He was Associate Director for Policy. He was key in formulating FDA's current policies on medical devices and drug-device combinations. Welcome to FDA Watch, Phil.
Thanks, Wayne. Thanks for having me here.
Also joining us today is Mahnu Davar. Mahnu is also a partner at Arnold Porter, where he co-chairs the life sciences and healthcare regulatory practice. Mahnu counsels clients on regulatory strategy and compliance issues related to the implementation of AI tools in clinical research, diagnostics products, and life science business functions like compliance monitoring and product safety. Welcome to FDA Watch, Mahnu.
Thank you for having me. Good to see you all.
And our third guest is Bill Maisel. Everybody who has ever worked with CDRH knows Bill's name. He's a board-certified cardiologist. He's currently vice president and senior medical officer at Intuitive Surgical. But previously, he served as chief medical officer and director of the Office of Product Evaluation and Quality at CDRH. He was there for many years, and he was responsible for the agency's pre-market, post-market, and compliance programs, and I think he has had a major hand in developing the processes that are used for medical device testing and approvals or clearances. Welcome to FDA Watch, Bill. It's great to have you here.
Hi, Wayne. Thanks for having me.
I'd like to begin by asking Phil and Mahnu to discuss the top-line results of Arnold Porter's industry survey of AI, which we conducted last year. What did you find? And when it comes to trends on the post-market use of AI, what were the conclusions? Let's start with Phil, if we could.
Yeah, thanks, Wayne. So what we found was enlightening. Across the survey of 100 senior leaders across all of industry in the pharma, medical device, digital health space, we found that AI utilization and plans for utilization in the future is trending upwards in all aspects of industry reliance, particularly in product development, but also in post-market surveillance and in post-market setting. We've seen it coming through in a variety of areas. As we said, we're talking about a little bit more in the post-market setting, but we're seeing it in terms of regulatory reliance. We're seeing it in terms of market insights, market intelligence. We're seeing it from a commercialization perspective. How do you take insights on how your product is being used, run it through AI, and leverage that information and those outputs to better enable your sales team to talk about the product, to better enable your ability to respond to how the product is being used and how it can ultimately be used to benefit patients moving forward. Mahnu, what else would you like to add on that?
And what I found interesting from our survey, which some of our listeners may have read and heard our webcast last year, is that of the folks that we talked to, AI adoption was still relatively recent. Something like 86% intend to adopt AI tools somewhere in their business functions in the coming year, but more than half express concern about the level of governance to ensure the quality and safety of those functions when they're implemented within their organization. But within the organization, also thinking about the external environment that drives governance decisions. So to sort of sum this up, this topic's very timely, but there's also some concerns, and I think folks are looking to experts that Wayne have been speaking in this series for a while for direction on kind of where things are going to go.
Phil, let me ask you one specific question and then ask Mahnu and Bill to comment on it. What's happening with AI today in manufacturing and quality systems and supply chain issues? Specifically, how is AI currently being leveraged to improve manufacturing efficiency, to enhance quality systems, address persistent supply chain challenges, and where do you see the biggest impact in the near future?
Yeah, so we're seeing it in a lot of places, Wayne. The area where I'm running across it most in my practice right now is in sort of the quality systems. When companies are looking at two areas where it's coming in. The first is when companies are thinking about how do they roll out AI-enabled tools out to their customers, out to their teams. They need to be thinking how do they incorporate this and how do they account for it within their quality system. So we're seeing new procedures being adapted to make sure that AI is being thought of in the development and in the refinement of those procedures. But maybe more importantly, and maybe more innovatively, we're also seeing how AI tools are being leveraged to improve those systems. I think we're all familiar that quality systems and quality management systems are designed to be an ever-evolving system. There's no such thing as a stagnant quality system. A quality system that was designed yesterday can always be improved moving forward. So I'm seeing a lot of clients running their existing quality systems through AI tools that are looking for where are areas that we can improve, where are areas that we may have gaps that we're not even aware of today, and then how do we respond to those. The interesting piece is once you've identified those gaps, there's still a further role for AI. AI playing a role in terms of identifying what are better ways or best ways to close those gaps, but it still relies on a lot of human interaction, a lot of marketplace knowledge in terms of how do we take that information and implement it as effectively as possible.
Mahnu, let me ask you the same question, and then I'm going to turn to Bill and ask you the identical question.
Yeah, I think an area within the scope of manufacturing and sort of technical operations that I've seen that's exciting is the application of AI in customer analytics. So companies in the 3PL and shipment and just-in-time shipment industry have been using these kinds of analytics for a while. And biopharma and life science companies are beginning to think about how to apply them to think about customer demand. And customer demand, of course, leads into manufacturing forecasting. And that then has a downstream effect on quality and preparation for quality. And so I think you're seeing increasingly companies starting to say, okay, if we're going to move product around via depots, if we're going to move product around based on customer demand in certain areas, how can we start using AI-based tools to start predicting how the demand looks and then applying that as a lesson to our supply chain? That, of course, has all kinds of down and upstream regulatory complications for products that are serialized or tracked and traced. But it's a really interesting use case. I don't know, Bill, you've seen this from a variety of perspectives, I know. Maybe I'll pass the baton over to you, as Wayne says.
Yeah, I think this highlights sort of a recurring theme, and I think one of the themes you'll hear me talk about, which is despite the novelty of AI and all the challenges it presents, our basic framework of regulation really does help and apply, and I think that's true in the quality system space and in manufacturing. So a lot of the controls that are in place to make sure we have good process in place to make sure that we're tracking and tracing product, handling complaints still apply. But AI really can add a lot of value, whether it's managing supply chain, trying to sort through thousands or tens of thousands of complaints, depending on the number of products you have and your global reach. The fundamental framework still applies, but AI offers a lot of opportunities.
Thanks, Bill. We'll turn now to somewhat of a controversial or trickier area, which is the use of AI for clinical decision support. How do you see AI transforming clinical decision support in the next 5 years? And what do you believe are the biggest opportunities and risks in integrating AI into frontline healthcare workflows? Bill, if it's okay, I'd like to start with you.
Yeah, sure. I think it's a great question. And, I think if we start with what are the opportunities, and they're really amazing opportunities for AI to help in clinical decision support, earlier disease detection and diagnosis,
Mhm.
personalized diagnosis and therapeutics, improved user and patient experience, and really helping us handle the voluminous data that we encounter every day in clinical practice. And leverage that to help us provide better care to patients and to help providers. These can be things as simple as computerized alerts to help remind a clinician about something for the patient that's sitting right in front of them, and it might be their 20th patient of the day, and they're getting tired, and so that can really help. It might be finding patterns or disease recognition that is really beyond the ability of an individual person or physician. So I think there are huge opportunities, and I'm very excited about what AI has to offer. And we'll talk a little bit later about some of the regulatory considerations, but just from a purely scientific and clinical standpoint, there are amazing opportunities.
Sure. Thanks, Bill. Manu, Phil, any comments on that?
I think Bill did a great job of summarizing some of the opportunities or many of the opportunities that lie ahead with AI and clinical decision support. But it also raises questions around transparency. How do both patients and physicians understand how AI is being utilized in these spaces? To me, one area of opportunity that I think is yet to be fully understood is what additional biomarkers exist out there that maybe we just as humans aren't capable of identifying just yet. They're too subtle for us to pick up on. And how do we put that through some of our computational modeling AI parameters to learn more about that? So again, opportunities I think right now are endless, and we're still trying to figure out how to best utilize this.
And I do think that there'll continue to be a role for industry to educate and inform regulatory efforts around this area. Certainly FDA has, through guidance and enforcement discretion policy, for a number of years, made statements about its views on how AI can play a role in, for example, clinical decision support tools. It's not entirely clear whether FDA has all the tools it needs from a statutory standpoint to fully regulate all of the potential use cases that my colleagues talked about. And I think that's something that we're going to continue to watch. I think it's a very interesting area because in healthcare, outside of kind of product-based thinking and systemic thinking, whether you're talking about the deployment of AI to find trends in medical records that are not necessarily diagnostic, or helping physicians sort of summarize case notes for better patient visits and to spend more time working with patients, those kinds of deployments have been in place for some time and are sort of at the cutting edge. And those aren't all systems that are necessarily subject to FDA oversight, but there's certainly a place where product developers can learn and sort of think about how they can iterate to create a product-based system. And that's certainly where I see a number of the collaborations in the AI-based CDS area going.
Just to follow up on that, how do you see AI being used in market intelligence and in other regulatory functions and pharmacovigilance functions? Bill, let me ask you first. Market intelligence, regulation, pharmacovigilance. How do you see AI being used in the context of FDA oversight?
Well, I think if you're talking just from the FDA perspective, FDA itself is beginning to use AI tools to handle the voluminous data they have, to monitor trends, to monitor advertisements and other types of things that they would do for compliance. I think on the industry side, being able to understand trends and interests within the clinical community, patient interest, concerns. AI is a really great tool to capture, particularly for global companies, information that is worldwide.
Phil, Mahnu, you want to comment on that?
So I've got a couple of thoughts, but maybe we'll start with market intelligence. I think that's one of the areas where I saw AI penetrate industry the earliest and maybe the most effectively. As AI was, first rolling out, we go back 10, 15 years on some of these tools. But I remember both in my time in industry and working with some of my clients, how are marketers, how are our organizations that are designed to get the message out there about what our products can do and learning about what their competitors are doing now. That was the first area that I saw it with. And the amount of intelligence that can be gained by combing through all the different news sources, all the different databases, whether they be public or public-private, and learning and sort of coming up with, here are the trends that we're seeing. It used to take, I don't know, from my standpoint, it takes me probably 6 months to 18 months of seeing things before I can start identifying, oh, here's what it's not a one-off or even a five-off issue, but it really is a trend. But it relies on all the different data points that I have visibility to. The AI tools are doing such a good job of combing through all this information and bringing this information to the forefront. I will caution that there's a lot of noise and there's a lot of false signals that come up here that I think humans do a very good job of identifying, hey, I don't think that's a real issue, but let me look into it and cross it off the list. But from a market intelligence and a competitive intelligence standpoint, I've seen really interesting things coming out of some of these tools.
Thanks, Phil. Now let's turn to sort of the consumer aspects of AI, and we commented on this in terms of clinical decision support. But looking at it from the consumer lens, in what ways do you believe that AI is currently helping patients manage their medical conditions, from diagnosis to ongoing care? And how do you see these tools evolving to become more personalized and accessible? Maybe we'll kick off with Mahnu, Bill, and then Phil.
Yeah, there's two. I'm going to grossly oversimplify two things that I think are very innovative that I've been at least working on recently, which I think have a potential to shape public health for consumers. One is the use of AI-enabled technologies to make comparisons between a consumer, individual patient's own health status, particular lab value, test value, medical record, whatever it might be, and some larger data set. And I think there is a lot of power when we can get this right and do it in a way that's effective and accurate to a consumer very quickly, and in some cases, maybe even in near real time, having a sense of where they stand relative to other similarly situated patients. The second piece of it is the use of AI and LLMs to translate very complex scientific concepts into user-friendly, consumer-friendly models. So, for example, understanding the etiology of a very complex disease and being able to go and figure that out in plain English so that they know what kinds of questions they should follow up with when they talk to their provider, that could be really a wonderful application. You can think about extending those applications to translate from other languages using an LLM into English, for example, if English isn't your first language. So I'm encouraged by those two applications. There's obviously risk to both. There's study that needs to be done for both. Both can be subject to higher or lower regulation depending on what the applications are. But they're two areas that I think are very promising.
Yeah, and just to double down on that, one of the most obvious and I think already present opportunities is in information summary for consumers. The AI summaries are very understandable, distill a lot of complicated scientific information into readily understandable for a non-medical consumer, and I think can be really helpful. The danger, the warning there, obviously, is we've seen many cases where the information isn't 100% reliable. Maybe the source isn't reliable. Maybe the AI fills in blanks where there's not enough information or there's no information, and it can make things up or provide misinformation. And that's obviously hard for a consumer to distinguish. But overall, I think in that space, these tools are already very good. I think the other real opportunity is on the device development front, and both on the personalized medicine front. But you can imagine, a patient with a glucose monitor who receives insulin or has an insulin pump. These algorithms are getting better and better, are going to be able to help tailor the insulin doses, therapeutic doses of medications, diagnostic information. They're already starting to have an effect, cancer diagnostics. So from a consumer standpoint, again, the real opportunity is improved diagnosis and treatment. Obviously, with a grain of salt that we're just at the beginning of that journey.
Yeah, I want to double down on something Bill said and where he led off with was on this consumer or patient education front. Got an anecdotal story. I think AI does a great job of transcribing or translating complex information in a way that it can be perceived and understood by the consumer. I consider myself a sophisticated user of healthcare services. I work in this space. I've been doing it all of my career. But when something is impacting you or a family member, you immediately go back to that patient mode. And what I found, even in my own experience, is I hear what the doctors are communicating to me. I've got the lab reports. I go through and I think I understand it. I found AI, explicitly consumer-facing AI, to be very valuable in translating that information into a way that it's understandable and that empowers me to ask the right follow-up questions so that I understand it and understand what's happening with the decisions around me and my family members.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Bill, I want to come back and ask you about one word that you mentioned before, reliable. How do we assure the accuracy, the reliability, the integration into clinical practice of AI? As we all know, health is essential to every single one of us. We want to make sure that the information is reliable. If it's unreliable, then it can have serious consequences for the individual. What do we need to do to make it reliable and to get that level of confidence? I always think about, the self-driving cars. They're a great idea, but I'm not sure I want to have self-driving cars without having somebody there to watch over it. How do we use AI and make it more reliable? I'll ask the others the same question.
Yeah, I think the first thing to acknowledge is that there have been algorithms, treatment algorithms, diagnostic algorithms around for decades. We're using AI now with them, but they've always been around. And so this concept of developing an algorithm and then validating the algorithm has been around for a long time. And that becomes really, really important when you're using AI. Those data sets that you're using need to be representative of the population you're going to ultimately use the AI in. If you have a very narrow development database and you try to deploy AI widely, it can be inaccurate or give you misinformation. And so the FDA's review focus for regulated products, regulated AI software functions, really focuses on those developmental data sets and then the validation that those data sets are delivering, reliable information. And there are a lot of ways to measure reliability. It can be a receiver operating curve. It can be sensitivity and specificity for a diagnosis. It can be positive predictive value, negative predictive value. So it's a very quantitative approach for the pre-deployment, for the does it do what it says it's supposed to do. Post-deployment in the wild, in the real world, I think gets a little more difficult. But part of the regulatory framework that the FDA has put in place is asking about and expecting for industry to have a plan for monitoring the performance of the AI that is deployed in the wild after it's on the market.
I think that's one of the areas that sometimes I think gets left out of the conversation when we think about how does FDA regulate AI and AI-enabled tools. We spent a lot of time focusing on the V&V activities in a pre-market setting, but the standard controls that apply in a post-market setting to all medical technology still apply to AI-enabled devices. I think the gap there is from a timing perspective, things are happening in real time, and there is a little bit of a time lag between when some of those signals would and could be detected. But I'd say FDA now has the ability to leverage AI in how they're analyzing those signals that are coming in. Got a couple examples of where I think it's already sort of demonstrated signals of data integrity that have come forward. So I think what I try to introduce to those conversations is let's not focus exclusively on what needs to or can be demonstrated in a pre-market setting. Let's not lose sight of the fact that we continue to monitor these tools and these projects after they're out there, and as Bill said, in the wild. And I think that's where we get the most useful data moving forward.
Thanks, Phil. We're going to take a quick break right now, but don't go anywhere because we'll be right back. You certainly don't want to miss the ongoing discussion. We'll be talking about AI and promotional activities, AI washing, and AI and compliance oversight.
And we're back. We're talking with Phil Desjardins and Mahnu Davar from Arnold Porter, Bill Maisel from Intuitive Surgical. I want to talk about AI and promotional activities. As you may know, I've spent a lot of time writing and speaking about ad promo issues. So I'm interested to hear the panel's views on AI's impact on these areas, on the marketing of products and FDA's oversight of the marketing of products. Bill, again, let me ask if you could start talking about that.
Yeah, I think that there are excellent opportunities to leverage AI for promotional activities for industry, whether it's generative AI, whether it's for a global company, translation into reach a global population, to monitor and understand who is receiving the information, what they're doing with the information. So there are great opportunities. Obviously, the companies are still responsible for the content, so you just can't hand it over to a computer and walk away. You've got to be reviewing and held accountable for it. I will say, on the FDA front, promotional activities, at least on the device side, has always been a little bit of a lower priority when you think about the limited bandwidth that they have and their ability to manage or monitor that. I think if things are clearly across the line, or promoting an unapproved use, or there's risks associated with it, then that's more likely to get FDA scrutiny. I think for companies that are making a good faith effort to stay within the guardrails of what their product is authorized for, are less likely to run into trouble.
Phil, do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, I would double down on everything that Bill said there. And I think there's a couple of things that companies could be thinking about. The first is, as Bill indicated, handing over control from a promotional perspective to generative AI, I think would be a really risky and tricky proposition. But giving it or empowering it to make recommendations, to bring new ideas and ways to sort of build out your promotional activities, I think is fair game. But making sure you've got the appropriate guardrails and controls that oversee that process. As Bill indicated, at the end of the day, the company's going to be responsible for what goes out in terms of how that product is promoted, and making sure that it's done in a compliant manner is always going to be the responsibility of that particular company.
And I've seen AI kind of picking up on that piece, used in some interesting ways now in industry for compliance, including being used at some companies to assist with what's called MLR review or promotional review, to do that first cut to see whether materials and claims that are developed meet fair balance standards and meet the company's style guides on things. So that's an interesting use of AI on the flip side, on the regulated industry side. To your point, Wayne, about kind of marketing more generally, I do think that AI is already finding its way into strategic marketing, right? And to think about whether you can use things like very targeted messages for very targeted physician or patient audiences based on kind of an ever-growing, ever-changing, ever-evolving sort of dynamic dashboard of who the customer is and where the customer is. And so I think we're just at the beginning of use of analytics in those areas. And circling back to Bill's point, I think an enforcement risk of the future there is ensuring that a company is, first of all, getting customer data the way it ought to be, but second, focusing on the right customers in a way that's appropriate for the product type that's being marketed, right? So the simple example being, if you have a product that's indicated for use for adults, targeting physicians or patients who are physicians who see patients who are under 18, or patients who are under 18, could give rise to regulatory and enforcement risks. I think we're at the beginning of this, but I think there's going to be perhaps the widest deployment of AI in the post-marketing space, actually by companies for customer analytics for this reason.
Thanks, Mahnu. We have time for a couple more questions. Let's turn first to AI washing. Can you explain what AI washing is and why it's important for healthcare leaders and consumers to be able to distinguish real AI innovation from marketing hype? Phil, maybe we'll kick it off with you first.
Sure, happy to. So in my mind, AI washing, I think it cuts two ways, but generally the way that I feel it's being referenced is when a company makes representations about how AI is being utilized in the development of a product, the utilization of a product, and how the outputs of some type of innovation is being utilized, particularly when AI was not done, when it is being embellished. So my concern is transparency here. Transparency cuts both ways. I think it's really important that consumers, customers, and patients understand when and how AI might have been utilized, whether it be in clinical decision, in diagnostic tools, or even in treatment tools. On the flip side of that, I think it's also important that there be real clarity and truthfulness in how that information is being framed. I think we've all identified a lot of positive benefits of how AI can be utilized in healthcare, but if we're overrepresenting the role that it can play or overrepresenting the opportunity and the benefits that it can have, I think that is a real detriment to consumers. That's something we watch out for with any of our clients that are talking about their utilization of AI in this space.
Bill and Manu, any comments?
Yeah, I agree with Phil. When nanotechnology first came out, everything was nano. Everyone called their product nano. They put nano into their labeling, and AI has a lot of those similarities. But to Phil's point, and look from the regulated product standpoint, FDA expects and requires labeling to be accurate. They expect for an AI product to have an explanation in the label of how AI is used to achieve the device's intended use. And so that is information that should be available to the consumer. For non-regulated products, I think there's a lot less scrutiny and a lot less oversight.
Sure. Manu, any final thoughts on that?
No, I agree with that. And I think some of the concerns about AI washing, I think will kind of resolve as the technology gets more pervasive and people understand better what its limitations and effectiveness can be.
Yeah. And FDA also just announced the completion of the first AI-assisted scientific review pilot and an aggressive agency-wide AI rollout timeline. Can you comment on that? Manu, we'll kick off with you.
I mean, I think it's promising, and it's something that industry watchers have been saying for a while, that reviewers in particular should have access to the most cutting-edge tools to ensure timely reviews and make sure that they're spending their time, particularly the technical specialists, on the highest value projects in order to meet what's a very demanding timeline. And I think particularly with the downsizing of certain review divisions, that's going to be critical. Sure. I think, like everybody on this call, we're waiting to see whether the AI tools that have started to be used and will be deployed give us the same level of confidence in the rigor of those reviews. I think if you look at recent statements by FDA leadership around those issues, I think they're very confident that they can achieve this. I think it's in everybody's interest to have high-functioning tools involved in reviews to certainly get rid of maybe more ministerial and repetitive tasks for reviewers. So sure. I'm encouraged by it. I'm watching cautiously, though.
Yeah. Bill, I know you were on the inside. So any inside scoop or perspective on this issue as well?
Yeah, I guess just that the opportunity for AI to reduce the time that review staff are doing menial tasks or repetitive tasks is huge. I mean, application submissions can be thousands of pages, and writing review memos can be redundant and really, cutting and pasting and rewriting things. So I think certain tasks absolutely would benefit from AI. And really, I interpreted the press release and the statement from the commissioner as being really about that. They're not substituting the decision making or the rigorous scientific review. They're just using AI to reduce the amount of time it takes to review a submission, and supportive of that. My one final comment will be, saying you are rolling it out to all parts of the agency and saying every review is going to use AI are two different things. And so I think what we can expect to see is sort of this stepwise progression in use of AI in the review world.
And I've got one anecdotal story about how I've seen FDA using AI, or at least I perceived it. I didn't say it out loud. So you've got your public statements that FDA has rolled out over the last couple of weeks and months. I had one particular pre-market submission that went into the agency, and we got a note back. The sponsor got a note back saying, it's come to our attention, there's some data integrity issues that have been identified with some of your third-party testing. This is testing that went in from a third party. It was not a domestic testing house, but the agency came back and there was no accusations. There was nothing that the sponsor would have been aware of or could have been aware of. But with these large data sets, FDA came back and said, hey, we have some concerns with this data. We'd like to explore it at another level and tell us a little bit more about what's going on here. And again, what we found out is that what I believe was through AI analysis, they identified some concerns that we were able to go back and correct. And what it ended up resulting in was the test was rerun through a different data, a different testing house. But I thought it was a really interesting way that FDA was able to utilize AI, not just from an efficiency standpoint, and not to replace the work that a substantive scientific reviewer would do, but in a way that I think they never had the capabilities of analyzing before. When you're looking at these huge data sets, I don't think there's any other way to identify some of these anomalies other than through leveraging tools like this.
Thanks, Phil.
Yeah, let me ask one final question here. Our podcast is called FDA Watch, so we're watching FDA. FDA is in the process of adapting to the ramifications of AI. They have to oversee the compliance. Do you think that FDA, given the cutbacks that they've just had and given the staffing issues, do you think they have the capability to do what is necessary in order to realize the great potential of AI? Let me ask any of our panelists to address that. That's the $64,000 question, basically.
Well, I'll give a comment to start. The FDA's AI journey has been literally going on for years. It's been more than 5 years, and they have had a slow drumbeat of policy documents, of evolution and thinking, of progress, and to their credit, have really been forward thinking and leaning in. Obviously, the fear is a brain drain and some of the most knowledgeable or experienced people leaving the agency. But I remain optimistic that the agency will be able to continue to help industry leverage the benefits of AI to patients' benefit. I do think there's clearly value, and patients and consumers will greatly benefit. And I think that is what is going to help keep FDA on track and moving forward.
Mahnu, Phil, you want to comment on that?
Sure, I agree. I would just add that, I think as FDA continues its journey and in all these various ways, folks at the agency begin to understand what the promise of the technology is, there may be limitations on their ability to deploy those technologies as effectively as they'd want through guidance, through regulation, through CPGs. And there may be additional tools, let's say, that they're going to need from Congress to give FDA statutory authority to do what it needs to fully unlock the power of AI, whether that's in terms of scientific standards, whether it's in terms of the types of products that FDA can review. So I'm excited to see what's coming.
Nothing else to add.
Thanks, everyone. And on that note, Wayne, it's time to thank Arnold and Porter, our terrific collaborator, for helping to make our first ever series an unqualified success. So thank you to everyone from the team and certainly to our guests today. Don't just take our word for it. Check out the incredible level of engagement we have received from the series on LinkedIn. And remember, it's not too late to get in on the conversation. We want to specifically thank our guests for this part 3, Phil, Mahnu, and Bill. Thank you so much for your time and insights this afternoon. We'd also like to thank our podcast creator and executive producer, Michael Levin Epstein, and our assistant producer, Sam Hoffmeister.
And if you want to find out more about our podcast, we have a website, fdawatch.net. I'll repeat that, fdawatch.net. And as we conclude our first ever multi-episode series, we know you don't want to miss any future series or future bonus episodes, or in fact, any episodes. The only way to guarantee that is to subscribe to the podcast. It's free. It's available on all your podcast platforms, and our website, again, fdawatch.net. Our podcast is really growing very successfully, and the reason is because many of you have chosen to be subscribers, which enables you to find out about upcoming podcasts sooner and to get episodes in your podcast feed automatically, and also because of our terrific guests. We've had a great series of guests, and many of the podcasts that have already aired really are worth going back to and listening to again. We're in a difficult transitional period here for a lot of things, and including the FDA, as we've talked about, and FDA Watch is right on top of that.
Thanks, Wayne. And as we say at the end of every episode of FDA Watch, if you really want to watch what FDA is doing, listen to FDA Watch.